Create in me a clean heart and purify me. Create in me a clean heart so I.
Our next session is entitled Systemic Design of White Supremacy, and it's going to be led by Dr. Burton. Dr. Orneita Burton is a professor of management science and information systems in the College of Business Administration at Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas. Her research includes studies in various forms in light and dark spirituality and the effect of each form has on psychosocial and economic conditions of people. Her research is drawn from studies on the interaction of people with technology in organizational settings and how we change and create change in social technical environments. Dr. Burton has worked in recent years to apply research methods and philosophies developed within traditional intellectual studies to guide the development of rigorous and relevant research approaches in the domain of management, uh, spirituality, and religion. Her work informs leadership in the design of systems and global communities to create positive environments for human flourishing. I've had the pleasure of knowing Dr. Burton for some years, so I know that we are in for a treat. Um, Once again, if you have questions for Dr. Burton, please message those directly to me or directly to the Carl Spain Center, and we will, as time permits, make sure that we uh, address those at the end. Without any further ado, Dr. Orneita Burton.
Thank you, Byron. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, just to be here. Uh, Dr. Taylor invited me to share elements of what he understood regarding my background. Again, is that I often wonder how this can impact the current situation. And in reality, after listening to Brother Green and I am shaken. I am shaken just because the complexity of what we are going to is more than we can imagine. And so I am hoping to be able to engage us in a way so that we see individually what God would have us to do in order to make a difference for now. Okay. And so each person will have to say, how does this relate? That's what I'm thinking, is that how can all of what we say and do come together to make a difference? And I do believe that that is God's work. And if we can focus on the idea of that God alone is supreme, that has been uh, an attempt, there has been attempt over many years and generations for people to hijack the supremacy of God. Okay. But I think if we can focus and be able to learn those things that are relevant according to truly who is supreme. Okay, that's an insult to think that we can be supreme over anything. Okay, and so I hope to be able to lay the groundwork to be at a point where we are good in the sight of God always and never put down beneath anyone. So, with that, I want to share some areas of study, really, and research that I think would make a difference perhaps in this area. And Byron, if you don't mind, if I can share my desktop, is that okay? Can I do that?
Yes, please.
Okay, okay. Let me go ahead and do so. And let me see if I can actually make this bigger. Okay, if I can make this bigger. Okay, good, good. That should work. So here, the sense of that there is design, there is a sense of that there are systems that would operate outside really of the design of God. Okay, and so with that, what I'm suggesting and what I am focusing on is the idea that I think if we understood systems, if we would spend time studying systems and studying what God has done, it does help to get our focus off of ourselves as created beings, okay, and perhaps as um, those who have perhaps been recreated in the minds of people, okay, is that it is very common for individuals, for humanity to try to take the place of God. And as such, this sense of recreating people in some other image other than what God has done is something that we need to address. And one way of doing so is to be able to focus really on what God has done and make a comparison between what man continues to try to do. Okay. And so the rationale and the justification behind systems is that there is design. Systems are designed. Otherwise, they would not work properly. They would not function if it was a random occurrence that was not designed. Okay. And so with that, when we look at the reality of that, there are layers and characteristics within systems that we need to get to and understand, because some are visible, some are not. Okay. Without investigation, there are elements of systems that are never known, we never know about. And in that hidden knowledge, that often we don't understand the craft of certain activities that people put in place, okay? And in not understanding them, then we can inadvertently take on some characteristics or give them more weight than they are due. Okay. And so understanding that there are layers and characteristics within systems that have nothing to do with what God has done. They are man-made elements. And if we understand that really there is no value to some things that are presented by those who would devalue us, that gives us a more stable foundation. Also, the composition, okay, that is made up of systems is very important, because one is that we can recognize that there's a whole of a system, but that's made up of individuals, and individuals of different levels of what may be perceived as power or influence. And then there's a connectedness that also exists where people actually adopt, okay, or choose to be within a certain system that really was not created by God, created by individuals who would use that particular system in order to gain undue power or influence over others. Okay. And so again, it's that there are these measures, the sense of that there's a connectedness that exists, okay, different degrees of that. That can be measured, actually can be measured in terms of when we really look at understanding a systemic approach to anything, in this case, white supremacy. Okay, so has a purpose, right? White supremacy has a purpose, and we'll talk about that. And we know, in reality, we do know is that it doesn't exist in a way such that we can't understand that. There's a bottom line when you look at things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay, when you take care of people's basic needs in terms of their physical needs and also their safety and security, you can pretty much hijack anything. And so the idea of white supremacy taking care of the basic needs of a group of people, it can be understood because it makes sense. Okay, so overall, the impact, the idea of how it impacts others, because in taking care of the needs of some, then often it takes away from the needs of others. And so from a systemic look at white supremacy, we can understand these things. And as a result, we can know more about ourselves and our purpose for being here. Because again, is that because we suffer and because we are abused or misused does not devalue us. That means is that basically when there are systems in place, such as white supremacy, then God is working. He is absolutely at work. I share this because I've studied systems for a long time, okay? And I've studied systems that tend to create destruction, okay? And so some of the research has to do with the idea of that there are elements of destruction that are there. Okay, one has to do with the present virus that we have. Is that my PhD was in the area of bioterrorism, and so that sense of that there are systems or weapons of destruction. Okay, mass destruction that are designed, okay, that they're designed, they're not natural systems. And so that sense of that you can actually take those principles, natural principles in terms of biological principles, okay, chemical principles, and apply them in a way that they become weaponized. Okay, very much relates to white supremacy, because again, is that to take a natural order, a sense of that where God has intended something to provide for the needs and the wants of all people, and take that and make it so it only provides and takes care of the needs of some people, you know, that's a different design. That's a man-made design, although it is, they are able to do so. Okay, we're able to hijack the systems that God has put in place, doesn't make it right. Okay, it also means is that there are elements within those type systems that we need to address. Otherwise, we live in a state of frustration and perpetual activity that really doesn't impact the core problem in these systems. So again, it's that, and I'm going to move through some of these slides. Mainly what I'm sharing is information. And so this is not necessarily just a presentation, it's more so detailed information. And so again, it's that I'm going to move through the information. If by chance you want a copy of the slides, ask Byron, because I can make those available. But again, it's that lot of information, but it's useful. I think it's useful. For example, again, is that comparing natural systems with man-made systems, comparing a spiritual element, okay, all of God's design with a fleshly element that does not put itself under the spiritual design that God has intended. You know, there are issues there. When interconnected systems exist, some that should be connected and some that should not, okay? And then ideally, again, is that sense of that God has designed systems, and he has a design that takes care of people, okay? And unfortunately, again, is that sometimes these systems and these what God has done, what God has intended, can actually be taken over by someone. It's just amazing. But again, there is that point of where God is supreme. Okay, he's always supreme, and understanding that just because man can't mankind does have a design does not reduce the power of God in light. And so I want to address that a little bit later. But again, it's that when we understand, when we devote ourselves to truly studying, okay, studying theoretically and philosophically and scientifically, okay, what God has created, no matter what man does, it gives us a more wholesome approach to anything that we do in order to truly understand and address systems like white supremacy, okay, rather than the individuals, because the challenge is that we're having to interact with individuals. And it's easy to take our focus off of a full picture of what God is doing in order to, one, okay, provide, and then two, to save and bring us to an end. Okay, we can get to a point of where we focus so much on today and not realize that God is truly bringing us to his end. And so we need to understand truly from a systemic perspective what is going on in our life. And I have some references here at the bottom, but at the end of the slide set, there are more extensive references in terms of people who truly understood the design of certain systems, and especially the idea of how you can replicate that design, okay, in a way that's wholesome. Okay. Natural systems. Now I'm going to move a little faster because I'm keeping track of my time. Yes, in the sense of that, natural systems we know about. Okay, in terms of biological systems, we are part of some environmental, we are impacted by some solar systems. We should spend time more there because we understand that there are some systems that can't be hijacked. And so basically is that if we understand that God's design is way beyond our influence to some extent, because again, it's that God wants us. He designed, he created so that we could interact with his systems, but also there are some that we are purely impacted by, and we can just study them. We can't influence them. We may think that we can, but in reality, we can't. One is the idea of that there are ecosystems, okay? And that's important because we're part of that system. We're part of those systems, even when some people may decide that we're not part of that system, or we operate at a different level that God never intended us to operate. And so the key point in terms of why do we even study certain types of systems, specifically ecosystems, is because there is this sense of interspecies competition, okay? And when you look at it, as opposed to looking at individuals, you'll understand that some systems or some resources there's a competitive element around resources, okay? And that's somewhat by design, but the intent is for an outcome that is good. Now, again, it's that in the sense of that people try to get away from what God has done. That shows up as we study systems, okay? But to associate with the negative aspects of elements that are just part of system interplay, okay, is that competition is not a bad thing, okay? It is an element of where it helps us to be the people that God would have us to be. But if we turn it into a sense of where there's no ability to compete for resources, there's no ability to use the gifts that God has given us in order to take advantage of resources that are out there. When the resources are usurped by a certain type of system like white supremacy, then we tend not to be, seem to be a part of what God has done, okay? And so that sense of where we can compete, and it's not in a negative way, it's more so that it's a resource allocation that is part of God's design, okay? Where resources are used for the greater good, okay? And so those that are more able to, by God's purpose and design to utilize certain resources, that just makes resource allocation, that maximize the benefit of resource allocation. And so understanding that it's not a sense of that I'm better than, it's a sense of that God has gifted me and given me a purpose in life, that we recognize that I can and should and will be fulfilled when I operate under God's design, as opposed to a design of white supremacy, which eliminates my opportunity to be part of this environment. So with that, man-made systems, okay, what God has intended in terms of the design of man-made creation, okay? Because men create, mankind, men and women, we create, and that's part of God's design, okay? And so that sense of where we can play and where we should play in terms of the design of systems, okay? These are systems that we know about, okay? So legitimately part of God's creative element in us. The problem is that when we start designing systems, okay, for the intent, okay, of destruction or devaluing or anything else that would not be subject to what God intended, that's the problem. That's the problem that we have, okay? And so that idea of that there are social systems as well, okay, social systems, and let me kind of move this down a little bit, okay, social systems. So when we look at social systems and the construction of them, okay, the intent should be for the greater good, right? When we look at it, okay? The challenge is that these systems can be, in a sense, weaponized, okay, if we're not careful. Again, we have to think about it, because in reality, anyone of any color, of any whatever background, we can weaponize anything. You know, you think about it, is in the sense of that, as Brother Green mentioned, is that a lot of what we do from a social perspective is that we can create barriers, okay? We can misuse certain elements of influence. We can certainly misuse resources or limit the availability of resources in systems, okay? None of which is God's design. The intent is to do just the opposite, so that everyone would be provided for. But the challenge is that when these systems of mass destruction, just like you've heard of weapons of mass destruction, okay, that is where we have problems. And in order to be able to operate, okay, to function, to move forward, even though these systems exist, we do need to understand elements about us, like who is involved, okay? The tools that are used, the weapons that are part of these systems with the sole intent of destruction, okay? And so when we look at, let me see, I think I have a slide, examples in terms of weapons of mass destruction, okay? When you do your own research, and if you haven't looked at these areas, is that basically they've always been weapons of mass destruction, okay? And as Brother Green mentioned, some are overt and some are covert, okay? Now, those that we can see and we can relate to, especially when we get into the physical elements of these weapons, is that traditionally, okay, we've studied more of chemical type of weapons, and then also biological weapons. Again, that's what I studied. And that sense of where they have to be administered in a certain way, okay, delivery systems, okay? Also that they're targets, okay? They're strategic targets, so it's not a random type of effort, okay? And more than one agent can be used, okay? And so again, it's that when you look at white supremacy, The idea of that, yes, some things are very obvious, some things that are not, how it is delivered. Unfortunately, every system that is part of our lives can be used. Education system, political system, whatever it may be, is that sense of when there's a strategic approach to mass destruction, then it is well thought out, but it's based on principles and approaches that exist, but misapplied. Okay, misapplied. This may be more of, we consider warfare. Okay, but again, it's that when we start thinking about that, yes, warfare, physical warfare, military warfare, spiritual warfare, is that the pieces are applied. They are exist. The pieces exist in every area. They are applied with the goal of destruction. Okay, more than one agent. Unfortunately, is that sometimes white supremacy comes through those who are white, but also they come through those who are Black, or even other nationalities. And so the sense of that, Black and white, that's a color thing, nationalities and whatever. We see that other people from other countries even pick up on that. And so the idea of that the agent can be one of many, but still that sense of understanding is that white supremacy exists in order to destroy. Now, it may seem like and be communicated that is to protect a certain race, and it tries to do that. But in reality is that we all fall. Okay, we all fall when there's destruction. And I hope that we can see that. Again, is that I'll try to cover as much as I can, but when a group targets an economy, any aspects of an economy, in order to do something that's more of man-directed, that entire economy falls. Okay, and so in other words, God's design cannot be tampered with without the ultimate destruction of everyone. And so the motivation behind white supremacy should be so that all might be saved. Okay. I put an example here, mainly in the sense of that we should consider is that weapons of mass destruction operate the same way, whatever it is. Say, for instance, here, one that we studied from a chemical perspective was cyanide. Okay, and you can relate to this, is that that's something that we know about cyanide, is that it's light and it disperses rapidly in open air, but it becomes dangerous when it's confined in closed spaces, and it becomes highly concentrated. Go back to the virus that we are experiencing. It operates the same way. As long as it's dispersed, okay, individual particles of it, is dispersed, okay, the body has the ability to be able to address it. Our bodies are made so that we can address any type of virus until it becomes concentrated, okay, and then it becomes more powerful, okay, and then it has ability to attack, okay, our systems in a more powerful way. And so that idea of when we start studying different elements, we understand how they work and what can be done, okay? And so questions that we would look at is that sense of that the purpose, okay? The purpose of white supremacy is just to destroy. It really is to destroy, okay? Although it may present itself as though it's trying to preserve, it is there to destroy. Targeted its destruction, okay, against people of color, okay? But it destroys us all. It really does, okay? I'm gonna move forward here, okay? And talk about that sense of some of the elements, some of the weapons or the tools, however we call it, is that basically, what are some of those elements of white supremacy that we need to know about? One is that it operates from an inclusion exclusion perspective, taking care of my own at the expense of another, when in essence, I'm destroying my own as well. Okay, because the focus is more on I'm taking care of needs, basic needs, material needs, is where I'm making sure that one group has material, physical things, you know, um, maybe the safety, the sense of safety. Okay, that's another level of need. So if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll see that at the bottom is more provision of physical goods, and then the next one is safety, and then everything else is more of the elements of realization in this world that we as people sometimes get focused on, when in essence is that they all come to an end. Okay, and so with that sense of where material goods is a focus, anytime we focus on material goods, we bring about our own end, right? We are misdirected from God's purposes. Okay, where my desire and my interest is in something physical. We need to consider is that white supremacy focuses on elements that really are not important when we consider this spiritual element of existing here, okay, for God's purposes. Paternalism, by definition, is a sense of that I limit God's power. That's basically what it is, and in that sense of where the justification is that I'm taking care of. Okay, I'm taking care of whoever, whether it is my own people or in a different way where I'm trying to choose to provide for African Americans or others, okay, Africans, whoever it may be, in a way that I decide. That sense of paternalism, again, is that it just doesn't work, and it should not be something that we would be um, distracted away from God as the perfect and only provider. Anyone that looks after you is probably working to your detriment, okay, because God looks after us and we are his creation. And so therefore, if we follow God's principles, then we are taken care of automatically. So that sense of that somebody else can take care of me or anyone else, we are limiting God's power in another person's life. Again, it's the sense of racism, and I put racism in two different areas in the categories, in the sense of that for someone or someone's to feel comfortable with choosing what is important in terms of physical characteristics. Okay, when we really look at some things, is some things are some elements of value are way beyond our being realistic. The sense of as Brother Green mentioned, color. Really, how could color matter? It may matter in a person's eyes, but that reduces ourselves to seeing things through the eyes of mankind, as opposed to seeing through the eyes of God. We just don't see that. In God's creation, we don't see that. In terms of with the coronaviruses in general, they don't care what color you are. Why should we? So that sense of being able to see as God sees, okay, and understand that some things are just crafted by people, okay, puts us at a different level of thinking. And it also puts us at a different level of suffering, is that sometimes the suffering is self-imposed. I don't have what someone else has, that God never intended for that to be. His distribution of resources is perfect. I don't look like someone else. Well, God never intended that. Otherwise, he would have made me to look differently. Okay, and so there's a sense of that we are put under misery are put under a perspective that makes us miserable, it's a mind thing. It's a mind thing. We need a better mind than that. We need a better view than what is offered through white supremacy. Okay. I'm going to move forward. Okay, good. Move forward. Systems. As I mentioned earlier, the participation and the influence of some systems we can choose. Others we can't. We can't do anything about uh, the rotation of the sun or where planets are positioned. We can't. And it should give us a view of where God does have a design where we can participate in some and some we just enjoy or we learn from. Okay. Now, from a social perspective or more of a physical perspective, perhaps, the idea of some systems we can participate by choice. Okay. And again, there's some that we can opt in and opt out of. Systems of natural design that God has created, that God has put in place, okay, they're inclusive. They're inclusive. As I just mentioned in terms of the coronavirus, is that there's no opting in and opting out of that, okay? Other than the idea of that we're under God's mercy. And so by what he has given us in terms of just health and general welfare, okay, is that perhaps we can not fall under the influence of. So again, understanding that there's some systems that we can participate in, and then some we have no choice. Okay. Systems like white supremacy are those where, depending on who we are, there's a choice. Okay. If I am accepted, okay, if I'm white or black, following their principles, I can perhaps be accepted by that system, okay? Um, because it is non-inclusive, though, is that some people automatically are always excluded, okay? Now you think about what does that mean, is that there are some systems that we really should not want to be part of. Okay. The challenge with white supremacy is that it provides such benefits and material provision that it would be hard to opt out of systems like that at times. Okay. Just because we are focused on basic needs. Okay. Also, that sense of that when we look at systems that are constructed by people, we do have to decide, who am I truly? And should I fit in some systems that are man-made? And so identity is important. Understanding what that system's intent is and the reality of that, who am I created to be, okay, is important. One of the challenges with white supremacy and other type systems is that they can, if we're not careful, confuse people so that they really don't know who they are. That sense of where do I identify in this system, okay? And so it does take a thinking of where I should be. Is this important? Okay, is it important to me? Is it important to God? Because systems like white supremacy redefine values. And so one of the most important things that we can do as people is to critically think about life. You know, sometimes we live more so with the sense of feeling and focus on those things that are really negative in life. But that's the purpose of white supremacy, is to throw our whole system out of being, out of kilter. And so when we look at that element of systems with the intent of destroying, then, okay, it is very much like, and I mentioned this in a previous presentation, is that sense of just like, kind of like the Matrix, okay, is that there's a hidden truth and there's deception, and there's so much associated with disrupting, okay, disrupting life to the point of where it's difficult to function just because weaponized systems, bioterrorism. The intent is really not to destroy everyone. That's what we had to focus on when I was studying this years ago and more recently, is the idea of that when there is an element, okay, such as a weaponized virus, okay, and all viruses are not weaponized, okay, that's not the sense. Some are, some are not, okay, especially, and I think that's the main problem, is the idea that we need to know the difference between them. We need to know the difference between white supremacy and a political system that is just flawed. Okay, we need to know the difference between white supremacy in a justice system and a legal system, and a system that's just dysfunctional in a sense of that it's not operated or managed well. Okay, and so that sense of understanding where a system like white supremacy is not meant to go and just like kill everyone, just like a virus. So that's one conclusion that we made in terms of weapons of mass destruction are not always intended to kill people, but to destroy economies, destroy health systems, destroy those elements that are important to us as a people. And so although many people may die in some sense, the main purpose is to destroy our way of life. And so understanding is that even if we survive some of the elements, some of the aspects of white supremacy, it won't be a good survival. You know, that sense of where those systems destroy a healthy way of life and many of the opportunities that move us above the physical needs and the safety, where we never reach those other three levels of where self-actualization and being able to be creative and experiencing love. And those are elements in a hierarchy of need. And so that sense of where even though our base needs may be taken care of, black or white, even though we may be safe, we miss what God intended for us to be as a people when we are affected by these destructive systems. And I'm going to keep going, Byron, because again, it's that I know time is limited. Okay. There's a language in terms of natural systems with when we look at what God has done, is that God protects his creation. Okay, and I think that's something we want to uh, uh, realize, and where there is hope because God confirms his existence. Okay, he is capable of guaranteeing the validity of results, okay, by truth and despite the deception and the lies that come when certain elements would try to take away from us what God has given. God is there. God is there, you know. And so when you study, there are areas of study, the idea that there are fact nets is that one of the most destructive things is when people lie. You know, that's, you know, sometimes it's taken very lightly in terms of lying as part of life, but no, you know, it's the most destructive thing that can exist. But God confirms. God confirms. He is a protector of truth, and so, and even in that sense of where there is the lie that people are less than, that we are less than. It's just a lie. It's not real unless I try to own it or I try to deal with it. Some things don't need to even be dealt with. We need to live a good life. We need to do those things, those creative things that God intended for us to do. And so understanding the language of natural systems empowers us to be the people God intended for us to be. We need to not believe the lies. And sometimes, again, it's that we need to not even deal with them. Okay. So there's scripture, we look at it and it talks about God's invisible qualities, his internal power, divine nature. It talks about them being seen. Okay. We need to understand them. We need to own them. We need to live without excuses, what the scriptures say. And so the scriptures are so powerful in terms of understanding and seeing and allowing the power of God to make us whole. So we don't want to miss that sense of that. If we focus on God and we focus on the systems that he has created, then we can live in a world that has the presence of elements of supremacy, not just white supremacy as well, but here we're dealing specifically with white supremacy, but the idea that there are always people and groups that want to be on top. It's a waste of effort, but again, temporarily, it does buy things, safety, power, but it's temporary. And if we understand that it's temporary, it makes a difference. I'm going to move forward because, again, it's that there are elements there, and the study of systems brings hope. It brings salvation. And in reality, is that we don't have to live under the crush of white supremacy, whether we're white or black, because again, it's that if I'm white and I'm not part of that system, I'm probably hated more than if I'm black. And so that sense of that I can live as God would have me to live. I don't have to live within a system that is that dominates and that destroys. I can live as God would have me to live and let God determine the outcome. Okay. Now I'm gonna move forward. Okay. I know I'm running out of time. Okay. I want to get into, and I talked about the idea of viruses. I'm going to move through that. And okay. Let me look at the sense of purpose and leadership, because and I've talked about membership, but the idea of leadership is so important. Let me move through there. Okay. Let me move there. The way that systems are typically studied is through networks. Okay. And so there's an element that is dealt with that is a field just in the area of network science. And so basically what it implies is that networks, here. The idea that there are components of every system, every network, okay? And the sense of that being either a node, okay, different nodes, that would be individuals, and then the idea that they are tied together, the links, okay? What exists within terrorist systems are that there are nodes, okay, that have different levels of power and strength, okay? In white supremacy, okay, and this is a comparison at networks here. I'm gonna go here. In white supremacy networks, there are those who represent or try to represent themselves as God. And we know that. We know that historically there's always been those that represent themselves as demigods, okay? Okay. And so what we don't know is, and realize and really consider, is that there are people, say for instance, who are greatly admired and respected, okay, that are represented in these systems as demigods, and they're just as real as gods, regular gods, not God, the one God, but the idea that they are treated as God, they're regarded as God. Okay. There's also those that are demigods, gods, okay, in that sense of that they are leaders. Okay, they're leaders and they are there for certain purposes, okay, that appeal to people's desires and their prejudices and all that is represented in a person. Okay. And so that sense of where when these people exist within these networks, okay, the network has the power really, because again, is that if I am a strong network of people with common shared beliefs, a demigod can do major damage. However, when there is a weak network, now here we every time we see words like weak, we think about something that's negative. But again, remember going back, I said that there's some things that should be connected and some that should not. Okay. And so the sense of where there are weak networks, okay, where people establish self-identity, okay, where an individual person of strength and power really doesn't impact the entire network because they're not connected. Okay? And so in terms of the solutions, there are solutions to terrorist networks. Terrorist, terror, terrorist networks are some of the strongest networks. You know, how do you break them down? You break them down by making it so that people, okay, the people are not connected, okay, in that person's effort. And so being able to break down certain networks that are intent upon destruction as opposed to the benefit of all, then they are broken down in terms of their connection. And so what that says is that for everyone, despite their color, is that if we operate with the identity that God has given us individually, okay, if we do what is right based on what God has given us to do, as opposed to what the group does, if we can get out of that sense of doing what the group does and following the group and following the individual purpose that God has given me, despite the color, then we can break up those networks intent on misallocating God's resources and destroying other people. So with that, I'm going to go toward the end. Okay, I'm gonna go toward the end and summarize. Again, is that if by chance some of this information you're interested in, um, ask Byron and he can get you the slides. One is that we tend to find our place, or everyone, that is kind of our search. We're born into a world, we want to find our purpose and our place. The challenge that we have, and our children especially have, is that we are trying to find our place in a corrupt system, okay? And in the Matrix, I made the reference to the Matrix, is just like focusing on the red dress lady that's in that system. You have to go back and watch it if you have not watched it before. But the idea that if I focus on who I am, okay, in God's creation, then it helps me to realize is that although I'm not in a perfect system, because man-made systems are never perfect, right? They're never perfect, okay? Is that I can have a spiritual response where I'm not part of a system that's been hijacked or created in an image other than God's image. Okay. I can remove barriers to my influence in any system. I can address lies, because just because someone lies doesn't mean I need to let it rest among the people. We can address lies, okay, in a very civil and professional way. Okay, we can instill truth. We can also um, initiate missing components in these networks, because there are positive nodes that exist in every network, every system that can make a difference in what is done. When we understand from a systemic perspective how we can influence what is going on, then we can find purpose and we can have that sense of hope that we are functioning as God would have us to function. So, again, it's that understanding that our adversary, whoever, is not an individual. It really is Satan because he has crafted these systems. We need to learn how to survive spiritual attacks. These are spiritual attacks. And so we need to be able to move forward and win our spiritual battles, remembering that these views, many of them are secular views in the sense of that even with suffering, okay, Jesus said we would suffer. Okay, so to think that our lives don't have any meaning because we suffer, no, our lives have great meaning because God shows us to suffer. Okay, so with that, I know my time is out. Yes, I have a couple of minutes, but I'm going to give those back to Byron. I appreciate your taking the time out to listen.
Dr. Burton, thank you so much. Oh my goodness, it was uh, y'all just got a piece of a master class. So I had the joy of being on campus with Dr. Burton. So I know you just got a piece of what is there. Um, but several of you are in asking me for the PowerPoint slides. That's why you want to be registered for this event. Make sure you're registered on the Eventbrite, and we're going to have the Carl Spain Center send those out to everybody that's registered. So just make sure you're registered. So even if you got the link from a friend, that's okay. Just go back to the Eventbrite and make sure you're registered on that Eventbrite. It's free. It doesn't cost anything. It's all free. And so we want to thank the Carl Spain Center for their leadership in making this so possible for us. Um, I'm gonna make a small audible in the schedule because I think not only from Brother Bobby's presentation, but also from Dr. Burton's presentation, there were some questions that were coming in. We just didn't have time for it. So right now we have a 15-minute break. But what I want to do, I'm gonna cut that break down. So we're gonna, especially since most of you are sitting at home, we're gonna make it a 3-minute break. So just get up, stretch, use the restroom, refill your coffee, and come on back. 3-minute break, or I'll give you 5. I'll be nice. I'll give you 5. Okay. So Robert said, yeah, give 5, Byron. Come on. I'll give you 5. 11:05. Be back here. We're gonna get started with Dr. Don McLaughlin's session, and at the end of his session, we're going to do a collective Q&A with the three of them, with Bobby Green, with Dr. Burton, and with Don McLaughlin all together, so that we can make sure we're answering some of these questions and going into the conversational part of this. That's so important, and we want to make sure we have time for that. So we'll see you back here at 11:05, and we're going to get started with Don McLaughlin. All right, we'll see you in a little bit.